Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is the wacky season that overlaps where hockey games are being played at the same time, baseball games are being played at the same time, NBA games are being played, and we're all sort of sitting around waiting for the NFL draft. This guy is a national writer and reporter for Bleacher Report, covering the National Football League, amongst many other things. He resides in Toronto, Canada. We all need a friend in Canada at this point, and he's my guy up there. He is Brad Gagnon. You can follow him at Bleacher Report, as well as doing his risk thing out on Twitter at Brad_Gagnon. That's Gagnon. Don't get him confused with a Maple Leafs fan, because he's not, but he is pretty hardcore Jays, which probably, much like being hardcore Orioles, leaves both of us on the outside looking in. What's going on, dude? Happy spring to you, man. Happy getting married and going off to Europe and doing all those fun things to you. It's good to see you, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I hope you've been well. Well, last time we spoke, it was live for the first time.
That's right. We were together in Atlanta. That's right. We were together.
Yeah, we might have chatted since, but generally, we had that great conversation. We kept seeing each other because I was located just down the path, basically, from where you were, where I was doing my work, and so I'd see you. And I could always hear you.
Did I
there's
drink
a
beer
lot of
with
voices
you?
there, but I could always hear yours.
Did I drink beer with you? Was there any chance of that?
Yeah, I think we had. You know how they brought the beers out and on the later in the week, late in the day. I think we had a bud or two, and as you know, it has to be bud if it's the NFL. So I think we went down that path.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's usually the path that goes down a Radio Row there. You know, after 26 years, you can only take it so seriously when every year it's Brady and Belichick. Let's start with baseball. Not that, you want to start with baseball, but let's start with baseball because the Orioles and the Blue Jays are entertaining us here this week, and we'll get to the NFL draft and all of that. Watching sort of where it was, right, with Buck and Britton to where it is now, which is with... Dude, you're going to need a scorecard for this one. I mean, you're going to have some fun. It's an all-time Oriole name team. So when I give you some of the names, it's right up there with your Chico Simones and your Drungo Haywoods. But Renato Nunez, Hanser Alberto, Rio Ruiz, Pedro Severino, Jesus Sucre, Joey Rickard. I mean, they got, this... Even a Mancini, not a Henry, but a Trey. It's a great name team, but none of these dudes are going to the Hall of Fame, bro.
I like that take. That's interesting. And I think Joey Rickard's my favorite player amongst that group. Just because for the first couple years of his career, he was Ricard to me because I wouldn't really watch Orioles games. I would just track, and it was Frank Ricard from Anchorman, and so that just was always in my head. But you're right. So some of these names do reverberate. Not exactly. I mean, that's a heck of a way to put a non-negative spin on it. I'll give you credit. It's a name team, but dude,
it's April. I'm running out of ideas.
You got to find silver lining, right?
I am running out of ideas. I mean, this team sucks. Nobody's going to the games. I've got other media executives coming up to me saying, "Are the Orioles leaving Baltimore, Ness? What do you think?" And I'm thinking to myself,
really?
well, I don't know where the money's coming from. Someone's going to have to give me the information sheet on the next 15 years because they've pissed away everything Camden Yards was, and now they've gone through this transition with Buck, Adam Jones, Manny Machado, all gone, where people aren't going to come and watch this, and it's probably not going to be very good. But you've got a whole situation in Toronto that's not all that dissimilar, right?
No, it's not. And what I'd be curious to get from you is what the sentiment is regarding specifically Machado, because, when you're talking that kind of money and he wasn't putting them over the top single-handedly anyway, is it kind of a resignation, a feeling of resignation, which is what it was for Donaldson and Bautista and Encarnacion at the end of their tenures with the Blue Jays. Even Russell Martin, by the time he was sent off this past off season, it was a feeling of, this is what they need to be doing, and we got to suck it up. And we've done a lot of
you came close, right? I mean, both of these markets had a 5-minute rejuvenation of Joe Carter and Cal Ripken and, whatever. I mean, you're a young guy, right? So, you even feel differently about it. I mean, you have no recollection of Joe Carter, right? Or am I wrong?
Unlimited. I remember the '93 World Series, not the same way you do. I wasn't there in live and living color like you were.
I was drunk in the upper deck. Yes,
exactly. I was very much sober and probably begging I was begging my mom to stay up while eating alphabets or something. So different experience. But
I was trying to avoid the glass on Young Street, and in every bar the song. Girl, I'm going to make you sweat till you can't sweat. No, that was the #1 song in America or actually in Canada that week. So that's all I remember about that night in October of 1993, as well as who I was with. What's up, Jules?
Well, yeah. So again, I did go through the 2 to 3 year tiny window of competitiveness that obviously Baltimore sort of coincided with Toronto. And it is funny how these roller coasters seemingly have very, very similar paths. I know I've said this to you before, but the one kind of silver lining or saving grace or whatever you might want to call it for the Blue Jays is they do have a lot of confidence in their farm system for the first time in a long time. And of course, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. leads the way in that respect. He's the #1 prospect in America and or in Canada for that matter, obviously.
North America, come on.
Exactly. And the idea is he's coming up soon, right? And he just reached his dad's plateau in terms of having identical amount of at-bats at the single AA, AAA level in the minor leagues, and their numbers are near identical. It's exciting. Of course, anytime you're talking prospects, the glass feels half full before you see what's going to happen, and there's obviously some potential downside, but there's several prospects in the Blue Jays system right now, and even guys who were up on the team who are at least young, exciting. They're going to get some nice crowds when Guerrero is up at some point later this season, which could be in a matter of weeks, and at least that gives you something to watch when you're okay with the losses. It's like, yeah, we know at this point they're not going to compete with the Red Sox and Yankees in spite of Boston's very oddly terrible start in the AL East. And so there's some hope for the future. And again, I don't pay as close attention, of course, to the Orioles, but in addition to being curious about how much resentment there is regarding Machado and the rest of the core there, if there's any hype regarding some of the guys. I don't think
there's any resentment. I mean, it's more resignation, right? I mean, it's
that's
not.
What I figured.
I mean, I don't think anybody's mad at the Angelos family for not giving him $300 million, and the Chris Davis lingering stench of the $100 million they owe him, and the circus it turned into when he couldn't hit the baseball for 2 months.
Well, that was a mess in the first place. I always questioned the contract they gave him in the first place.
Well, I mean, and to some degree, dude, by the way, Brad Gagnon here, he's in Toronto. He's a Bleacher Report. He really covers football more than anything else, but we're in a baseball conversation as we're wont to do. Your organization, when Shapiro came over, who's a Baltimore guy, by the way, and a friend of mine, Mark, they could have given a lot of money to Donaldson. They could have backed up the truck for, any of the big sluggers they had, Bautista and Bats and all that stuff. That didn't happen, right? I mean, Tulowitzki. I mean, there was all these guys that sort of came through, and they didn't sink the farm into anyone. And unlike here, where they're building from 115 losses, there is a point where, I look up and I see Shoemaker and Sanchez and Stroman and say, hey, you at least have a couple of guys that can go out and take the ball every couple of nights that may make you believe next year you can win 89 games if you get a player or two or something happens or whatever. I don't know what you reach for in this division where the Yankees and the Red Sox are always going to beat you up, but you reach for whatever that thing the Blue Jays had for a couple of years, whatever that thing the Orioles had for a couple of years, and now it appears that the Rays have it at least again for 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that, there's the business, as you know, with the Orioles too. There's the business standpoint and there's the competitive standpoint. And the Blue Jays organization and Rogers Communications, which are very much in tune to the idea of we can't stink so much that we're going to be a depressing watch, because that's where we don't get even 10,000.
Watching the Orioles go up there and there's nobody there. I mean, 6,000. I mean, how many people were at those games? Seriously,
it's ugly, and that's Toronto. That's a lot of cities, of course, but Toronto fans don't. They've got a lot of things to do, man, and I'm sure Baltimore folks do too. And big cities, there are a lot of entertainment options, and people are discernible with their money, and they're going to say, "I'm not supporting something that I know isn't going to pay off for me." And that doesn't necessarily need to mean it's a World Series contender. It has to mean that they have a good chance of winning on a night-by-night basis, of entertaining you on a night-by-night basis, of having a great pitching performance on any given night, and having a great batting performance from a player like Vlad coming up, or any of the current guys who are kind of giving some excitement to the fans right now. So it has to be something that when you're saying, is it worth bringing my family of 3 or 4 or 5 to the ballpark on a Thursday night? Am I going to get banged for my buck? And so that's what I think the Blue Jays are extremely conscious of, and which is why they're not going to probably loaf much longer with Guerrero, and why they haven't completely gutted the roster in spite of the fact that they have admitted this is going to be a rebuild. It's somewhere in between. There's a team that could have, as you alluded to, could have won 85 to 90 games, had it re-signed Donaldson, had it maybe kept Edwin around and not traded him a couple years before that. And, however you want to spin it, there's a chance they could have been competitive a lot longer, but the ceiling was probably there at that point, and they realized we got to tear it down a little bit, but also give the fans something in the middle, a happy medium to get them coming out to the ballpark to an extent, because it can get even worse than it's been in Toronto the last couple of years. We saw that only 6-7 years ago when the Jays were right near the bottom of the league in attendance.
The thing that really pisses me off is, and I'm wearing my Geddy Lee sweatshirt right now, my Rush sweatshirt is, when they're bad, Geddy doesn't come, right? That's part of the vibe for me. How about the woman that sits right behind home plate, not flinching on the line drive? You see that one? That was a
she's a superstar. She's been there a while. She knows what she's doing at this point, I guess. But it takes some serious. You could be warned a million times. I'd still spaz out every time.
Well, I think she knows spin rate, I think is what it is. Brad Gagnon joining us here. All right, let's move from baseball on to football and on to where we are with the Ravens. Last I saw you, we were on Radio Row, and Joe Flacco was going to be dealt somewhere. You and I have not had the Flacco to Denver conversation, or the Ken Lamar win conversation, or, hey, the Browns are contenders conversation. So welcome in. Welcome to the draft. I don't think we're going to talk a lot about the Ravens next week. It's going to be all Browns and all Arizona Cardinals and all of that as we lead up to the draft. But intrigue in 32 places in this league, Brad.
Yeah, and you're right. The Ravens aren't front and center. For once, the Browns in the draft are not front and center. I suppose if anyone's making a splash in the division in this draft, it would be the Bengals, who, of course, never trade up. But, my last mock draft, I had them running into Kyler Murray, who I still don't believe is going number 1 overall. So, you look at all the different scenarios, and, it's not maybe an over-the-top AFC North tuned draft in terms of where the headlines are going to be generated. But, man, a lot of headlines are going to be generated. I mean, the thing is, we've caught on to this notion that there must be several great quarterbacks in every draft, because there have been in recent drafts. We've had a nice hot streak of very successful early impact quarterbacks coming out of the first round, including 4.
Yeah, I would say I want my Jared Goff, but I got my Lamar Jackson, and that's what I've got.
Exactly. And Lamar Jackson ends up in the playoffs. There's still a ways to go with him, but regardless, I can't argue that his rookie season wasn't successful. And so now, as a result of that, we're looking at a class that's not good on paper, not good in terms of when you look at the raw abilities of the quarterbacks available, yet 5 might go in round 1 again, yet 4 might go in the top 15, yet teams might trade up that have guys like Derek Carr already, or already have Josh Rosen on their roster using the number 1 overall pick on a quarterback. I mean, it's just become insane in terms of the desire for them and the belief that all of them must be successes, because so many have been lately. That crapshoot ratio, that 50-50 that we always talk about with quarterbacks in the first round of the draft, that has changed of late. And is it fool's gold, or is it an indication that they're grooming them better than ever and that they're ready to make an impact better than they ever were before, back when we had to deal with the Jamarcus Russells and the David Carrs? And so that's the debate. That's what makes this the draft more interesting than ever. From my standpoint, is I can't imagine all these guys are panning out. I see some obvious flaws with all of them. 1 or 2 of them might, but several of them won't. And there's a good chance some teams are going to get burned in the first round next Thursday night.
Well, and there always are teams burned, and certainly for the Ravens, they were sort of burned in free agency a bit, and a complete heart transplant, right? Mosley, Suggs, Weddle, Flacco all gone, and then Earl Thomas comes in, swoops in, and they sign a Hall of Famer in free agency. It's going to be a different look, and I think we're going to need a scorecard around here to figure it all out.
Yeah, and I like it in the end, the transition from Weddle, who I think is still one of the best safeties in the league and a selfless leader and just a fantastic player who doesn't seem to be aging. But regardless, you shave off 4 years, right? You get younger with Earl Thomas, who might have more tread on his tire as a result of his recent injuries. Then again, of course, the counter to that is his recent injuries could be somewhat of a concern in terms of his durability. But I like the transition there. I don't mind that at all. I don't think you pay a guy like C.J. Mosley, an off-ball linebacker, the kind of money that the New York Jets gave him. I know the Ravens wouldn't be the kind of team that would typically meet that number. And so, I can appreciate that as well. I can appreciate not paying, Terrell Suggs at the age of 36. None of it perplexed me, and even on the offensive side of the ball, I know that you have a long relationship with Joe Flacco, and I know that the city has a great relationship with him as a result of what happened in 2012. But it's entirely possible that a new environment was necessary for Joe Flacco to continue to succeed. He had not played fantastic or consistent football in the last few years. And so maybe a new environment was necessary because obviously Lamar is the guy and, you keep him around had they done that, which was obviously incredibly unlikely regardless. And then you have a potential controversy on your hand if Jackson starts to struggle. Now Jackson officially has full control of the boat. There's no questioning him if he struggles for a game or two or he throws a bunch of interceptions one Sunday afternoon. He's the dude, and I appreciate that move to do that. And obviously the trade from their standpoint is fantastic in terms of being able to finally offload most of that contract. And so, it all makes sense to me. Not that it was not a net gain overall. They will miss Mosley. They will miss Suggs' leadership. They will potentially miss Eric Weddle's leadership. But regardless, it was sort of you look at every move in isolation. It's like, yeah, all of this makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, but I think it's a lot more change than we're used to around here. And part of that is Flacco leaving to go to Denver and watching those 4 o'clock games and saying, how's he doing? We haven't had a guy like that around here leave where we're going to watch him and wonder whether there's tread left on that tire. And I've had people make the case that Joe will win playoff games in Denver and that Lamar will not around here. And I've had plenty of people make the case that Joe Flacco's washed up, and I don't know what John Elway sees in him, and I'm glad he didn't come to Jacksonville or he's my quarterback in Washington or Minnesota or anywhere else. I am always shocked to hear what people think of that. Will Joe Flacco play a playoff game for the Denver Broncos, Brad Gagnon?
I wouldn't bet on it. I mean, this league is so unpredictable. You can make a case that Lamar becomes a bust and Flacco has a late career rejuvenation with a team that has a great defense and some nice new additions to the offensive line. He's well supported in Denver, but he was pretty well supported in Baltimore too. And so, arguments can be made on either side. The argument can be made both end up succeeding and the Ravens go, yeah, look, Joe's done great, but so is Lamar. And then both could bust. Flacco could be done in a year or two, and Jackson could turn out to be a bust as well. And so it could go anyway. I wouldn't bet on Flacco having a ton of success. I just don't see it the last few years. And you know what? You probably watch him a little more closely than I do, but I'm pretty sure I've watched most, if not all, of his passes, but through whether it be tape study on Mondays or Tuesdays or whether it be on Sunday afternoons watching live. And I just don't know if it's there. I've heard from many Ravens fans, many angry Ravens fans when I've criticized Flacco over the years who have said he hasn't been well supported. I just said he has. His offensive line has been there for him generally. His running game has been somewhat revamped the last couple of years. Not any elite receivers, but we've seen quarterbacks, good quarterbacks, elite quarterbacks succeed despite receiving corps that have been in similar or at least close shape. And so, I don't really think that that's enough of an excuse, in my opinion. I just don't know if he's quite had it, and I haven't seen him consistent whatsoever. And that's really been a problem for much of his career, whereas he had that run in 2012 where it's like, okay, maybe this guy is turning it around. He gets the big contract, and he hasn't really been the same since. So I find it hard to believe at the age of 34 he's all of a sudden going to make a big run, maybe in somewhat of a caretaker capacity. But if I had to bet, I would bet he doesn't start another playoff game in his career.
Brad Gagnon joining us here from Bleacher Report for the great city of Toronto. They call it T.O. I wish I had more trips up to Toronto, although we are hoping to put together a Buffalo experience here. So the NFL schedule pending, maybe even out by the time you hear this. You can find me out nasty at WNST.net because I do have some alternative plans for Buffalo, Toronto, and Niagara Falls if we get the right scheduling. That's a nice little trip, right, Brad? You would sign up for that, right?
Oh, I mean, especially the Niagara Falls trip, you can't go wrong. It's like the capital of cheesiness, and in a good way. You know, like you're going to take in all the ridiculousness, and you can have you can see you go to wine country. You can hit the actual falls. You can go do some gambling if you so choose. I mean, it's the ultimate trip, and then of course you finish off in my city. I mean, it's a nice little circuit. I'd love to join you. We'll have to try to meet up. I haven't met the wife yet. I missed her at the Super Bowl, so we definitely have to try to get that on the schedule.
All right, so last thing for you on the Toronto thing is this Maple Leaf thing. You know, there's a part of me that's just I'm rooting. Well, obviously, I'm with Barry Trotz now, so I'm pulling for the Islanders. I want the Islanders to do well. That's my man. I have I've moved my attention elsewhere. But if the Maple Leafs win the Cup, I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Like I've said this to you a lot. I think it would really be a lot of fun for the league, for the continent, for the sport. And certainly for the city, if Toronto were to win or really be relevant, give it a hell of a run and can play into late May at least, give a nice 3-series run out of it.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of folks and a lot of non-Leafs fans, and I'm a non-Leaf fan, as you said, and I agree entirely. And it really is kind of heartwarming to hear it and to say it because it's not just about this ridiculous competitive streak that we all have as sports fans sometimes. Sometimes it's just, I'd rather my team, but I'm okay with your team. And it's also just about
my team won the Cup last year. I'm good. I'm good for life.
Exactly.
That's been part of my departure from the Caps, and I haven't watched the Caps at all this year. I have a letter to Ted Leonsis that has some poison in it that I've been trying to keep to myself at least for a year.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, the Cup didn't come to Baltimore. They won the Cup. I'm not happy about that at all.
Okay.
The Cup was promised to come to Baltimore. I was lied to, which made me a liar, which they won the Cup, and the Cup didn't come to Baltimore. And I don't think that's cool. From a guy who has supported the team for 40 years, I don't think that's cool. So that's just how I feel about it. And, whoever knows about that, have at it. But I'll just say this. For Toronto to win a Cup and for me to have been there, and this would be said for Winnipeg, for Vancouver, for any of the Canadian places. Look, Edmonton and Calgary, enough already. They can wait a little while. Get in line, I would say. Even Ottawa, right? I mean, but Toronto would be the epicenter of all of that. If you like the Cubs story or the Red Sox story or you like any of those fuzzy stories, the Maple Leafs, I want to see them win a Cup. I want to be on Yonge Street the night that happens wearing a Maple Leaf hat. I do.
Yeah, and that's part of it. You're right. I mean, I'm a Blue Jays fan. You're an Orioles fan. I was cheering for the Red Sox in '04. I don't know if you were, but I certainly was. My team wasn't alive, and I wanted to see it happen. I wanted to see history. You want to tell your kids and grandkids about it, whatever it might be. So that element's cool. The idea of being able to participate in history is always cool. And then there's the human element, which is just as simple as I think I mentioned this to you at the Super Bowl. My stepdad's a 65-year-old Leaf fan. He was in his 20s when they last won the Cup. No, he's a teenager, I guess. I mean, how cool would it be to have him experience that? Sometimes we've got to put aside our allegiances and just say, there's people we love who love these teams. And so it's cool to see them experience these things. And again, as a spoiled, in your case, Caps winning last year, spoiled Caps fan or a spoiled Habs fan who, even though they haven't won, since the Jays won theirs in '93, they've still had 24 of them. It would be nice in terms of my friends and family getting to experience that. So you kind of, you do got to set aside the allegiances a little bit and just appreciate the idea of having somebody that you appreciating the victory.
Well, yeah, if my team can't win, I just don't want it to be, let's see, the Steelers, the Yankees, the Cow. You go through the list of the teams I don't want to see win, right? Or the people I don't want to see win, like Cam Newton or, the guys I root against, quite frankly. How about Tiger Woods, right? Like, I've enjoyed rooting against him. For the first time in my life, I almost, until he's with the idiot that's running our country. I don't know if you know about that thing.
I know.
He's getting pawned off based on the color of his skin as like one of Don's guys. I didn't shed a tear like other people, but I wasn't particularly, unnerved that he won. I'm happy he won. It's a great story. I'm glad he loves his children. Maybe he's a better guy. Maybe he's going to serve the world in a great way. That's nice and it's heartwarming for me. So even I can be an old softy at 50 about something like that,
I wouldn't, by the way, I wouldn't believe that age, but all right, I'll take your word for it.
I just don't really want to see Jerry Jones win. I don't, I have a couple of things that, that are on my not to do. I don't need to see the Indianapolis Colts win again, right? Like, there's some places that I harbor some deep grudges in my soul, but the Maple Leafs winning the cup, that's not one of them for me. So,
well, the folks here will appreciate that, and maybe you need to plan that for June, because it's not out of the realm of possibilities considering what's happening to the Tampa Bay Lightning right now in terms of the Leafs making a run.
Here's how I feel about the cup, okay? And this is after having had dinner with it at my table for an hour, eating salad, talking to the cup as I was doing it. I should have videoed all of this. This is how I feel about the cup. I want everyone to have the cup once, right? Like, so... Except the Flyers, okay? Not the Flyers. But anybody else, I want... I do want to see everybody win the cup once.
But yeah, you're allowed to reserve some teams. And I'm a Habs fan. I'm supposed to probably reserve the Leafs. But, I was speaking to friends about this weekend. It's not even like the Habs and Leafs have much reason for hatred toward each other in the last, 30, 40 years. The rivalry is based on what happened in the first half of the 20th century, more so than the second half and the start of the 21st century. And so, the Habs' biggest rivals are probably the Boston Bruins,
of course,
maybe even the Ottawa Senators. Geographically, that makes more sense at this point in time. And so, you ask a Habs fan, and typically they'll say, yeah, if they had to reserve certain teams that they would not, their blackballed teams, if you will, they'd be as likely to go with the Bruins or the Senators as they would, or even the Lightning of recent years, as they would with the Leafs. And so it's just interesting how those black balls sort of can change over time. I mean, right now the Steelers and the Ravens and the Browns and the Bengals are all locked together, and they have been for a long time. But in 20 or 30 or 40 years, depending on how realignment and expansion and everything else happens to the NFL, for all you know, the Ravens lose a rival or they gain a new one, and that changes your black ball dynamics in terms of who you're allowed to win a cup or a finals or a Super Bowl.
I remember when the Blue Jays and Cito Gaston were the Antichrist around here. That's when we loved baseball. But back when you were a young man, Brad Gagnon. He's Brad Gagnon. You can find him at Brad_Gagnon, out on Twitter as well as at Bleacher Report from the Fighting City of Toronto. Do you ever go to Bills games? Do you ever drive down there and do that or not?
Yeah, well, I get down, and if you're there for the Ravens, I'll do my best to make my way to that one.
I will be there. It's just a matter of maneuverability and pliability and how many people on my trip would have a passport and could get across the border, and I don't know. We'll figure it out, though. But I am encouraged. This is going to be my favorite trip of the year, is to go to Buffalo and somehow maybe turn it into something with Toronto. So if the NFL schedule gods will have me, but Lord knows it might be New Year's Eve and it might be a foot of snow, right?
Well, that makes it even more fun. And then you can do it. You'll do a table jump, right? I want you right there with Bill's Mafia.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, don't get me started on Western Pennsylvania and Lackawanna County. Hey, man, take care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, man.
Brad Gagnon joining us here from Bleacher Report, and you can find him out on Twitter as well, doing lots of football, but a little bit of Toronto and a little bit of sports love all the way around. You can find me out in the Bayou, Toyota.com audio vault, 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, everywhere your mobile device travels, we are. WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.